Welcome back. This is video 2 of chapter 15, which is looking at inflation, unemployment, and monetary policy. So we're going to skip back up to where we were. And we ended the last video on this slide, which is looking at the intuition behind why an increase in wages should lead to an increase in the price level, but also how a change in firm or industry dynamics could likewise affect inflation. Okay, so this is probably the trickiest slide contained in this unit, and we're thinking here about how to show a change in bargaining leading to a change in wages and ultimately leading to a change in the price level, and then ultimately the effects on overall employment. Okay, so let's think back to chapter 9, which talks about how a change in bargaining power should lead to a change in equilibrium employment. Okay, so suppose workers bargain for higher wages, recall that an increase or a shifting up of the wage setting curve, which is what this upward curving or upward sloping function represents, is a reflection of the fact that workers need more in order to work as productively as they had. So if workers bargain for higher wages, we're going to expect higher nominal wages at every price level, at every level of employment. This is going to shift us from point 1 to point 2. An increase in the nominal wage W leads to this upward shift of our wage setting curve. Initially, the price level should stay the same. Unfortunately, this is going to have a depressing effect on firms' profits. If wages rise and prices don't change, then firms' profit margins are shrunk. So we're going to eventually expect that firms are going to raise prices to accommodate that increase in their costs. So if firms want to maintain profit levels, they will increase prices after wages have increased. And this should shift us essentially from point 2 down to point 3. So the way this is drawn, it assumes that essentially real wages stay the same overall. We're going to expect a proportional change in the price level to accommodate that change in the wage. And this is where we come back down to point 3. But unfortunately, given that firms are still paying a nominally higher wage to workers, they are going to now be at a lower equilibrium employment level. This is the logic. It's important to note that firms may not immediately raise prices to accommodate that increase in the wage that they're paying. All of this is going to boil down to how firms are actually responding to things, how firms expect their customers to respond to an increase in the price level, and so forth. So the wage price spiral basically tries to come up with a dynamic for how these two factors are going to interplay with one another. Suppose we have an increase in wages, and this is what we just saw on the previous slide. If workers successfully lobby for an increase in their wage, this is going to increase firms' costs of production. As firms' costs of production increase, they should charge a higher price. And if this is happening on a wide enough scale, we could actually see an increase in the aggregate price level. It's important to note that if this change is just happening at one firm, it's not going to translate into inflation, because inflation is looking at the aggregate price level rather than the prices for just one good, or perhaps even the price of just one industry. Okay, the bargaining gap essentially says that workers may have more or less power to bargain over their wages depending on the structures of the economy at large. So If unemployment is greater than the equilibrium level, given price setting tendencies by firms, given the wage setting curve representing the necessary given the necessary efficiency wage to encourage workers to work hard, they were going to expect a decrease in workers' bargaining power. This is a scenario where we don't expect to see workers bargaining for higher wages, leading to an increase in the overall price level if firms are going to try to match that to keep their profits up. On the other hand, when unemployment is greater or is less than the equilibrium level, when the economy has what is called a tight labor market, we're going to expect much more bargaining power. And the idea here is that workers have more opportunities to leave their employer and find work elsewhere. And that's when we tend to expect to see more arguments over wages, more successful contract negotiations, etc. Okay, now we're going to transition to thinking about aggregate demand and inflation, but I'm going to pause here and resume with this on the next video.